Today on Panelism, we discuss the dangers of recaffeinating so late in the afternoon. Hello, and welcome to Panelism, the podcast where we talk about the comic books and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I am Todd A.
Taylor Trask. That absolutely has to be the intro, Todd.
Oh, okay. Have you recaffeinated today?
Yeah. So we were talking earlier. Like, I have discovered the beauties of CBD coffee, and I don't take too much, but it's very effective in kind of just giving you a nice, comfortable focus. But sometimes I think I've overdone it a little bit this weekend because do
you get the caffeine feeling? Like, that's definitely what's happening to me. I'm only just starting my afternoon cup, but it's, I'm already feeling a little jittery. That's what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, it's the caffeine feeling, but it's not jittery so much as like peppy. It's like you feel sort of this kind of like almost euphoric energy, where it's just like but it's not. It doesn't have that nervous kind of frayed, jittery feeling that normal coffee gives you.
Right, that I'm currently having. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, it just feels like it's funny because we recorded last week, although this episode that people are listening to may come out of order, but we had such a long chit chat beforehand last week that it was like we just rolled right into the podcast. Like, we just hit record, we just kept going. Yeah. And this week it's like just been we've tried to record the intro like 5 times. Ah, boy, it's just a punchy weekend, I guess.
That is.
But as we were trying to say in the intro, we threw out the idea of, like, I had a book I wanted to talk about. You recently reread a book that you wanted to talk about, like a series. Mm-hmm. And then as we just caught up before we hit record, you were telling me that you're having your own little comic book festival in your house. Yeah. Like, you're sort of going back through a lot of beloved series, which is very cool.
But here's the thing. So I have, truth be told, I've been in kind of a lull since maybe December. Kind of the last book I really got into, where I was like feeling feeling it and just loving the format and everything, was the Day of the Magicians book I picked up in Santa Fe. And then that was kind of, I've been sort of reading things, but it feels more dutifully, and it's a lot less than I had been reading, since December and earlier. So that had been sort of a little sad, and then had my shelves have just been kind of staring at me this whole time, and then all of a sudden Friday afternoon, we're recording this on a Sunday, Friday afternoon, I just kind of like fell in love with my shelf again, like it was my own little private comic shop, and things that I hadn't picked out or looked at for like a long time, all of a sudden I'm like, ooh, that's cool. Wait, I'm home now. I own this. It's like it just had that feeling of re-experiencing a lot of these books again. So I went deep on a bunch of different titles that I won't talk about them all, but like there's definitely one in particular that led to touch on. Yeah, that led to something else.
That's cool, because I as you said that, I had to sort of remind myself, because I think when we recorded our last episode together on the book Why Art, we felt like, hey, this is the first book talk we've had in a while. But so I just went back through the episodes for this year. We talked about Rat Queens and Black Monday Murders in January, and then we have not had like a book club, like chit chat, where we're talking about books specifically until last week. So into April. The difference is, like, you talked to Daniel Rojas, you had talked to Frank Fry, so a lot of comic book chats. When we talked about our playlist for shut-ins, we talked about comic books. You talked to the Obscura creative team, like, tons of comic book talk, but not that like dedicated, like, hey, this week we read these books. I'd actually gone through similar to you, sort of not rediscovering ones I'd already read, but I finally finished I Hate Fairyland, was able to complete that series.
Wow.
Yeah, and have my
Let's
own
talk about
little.
that sooner than later because it came up in the Daniel Ross discussion, but like
Yeah,
I would love to because I have both of those volumes sitting on my shelf,
that's what spurred
staring
me
back at
on
me.
was your conversation with Daniel. Like
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I gotta finish this out, and I had purchased the volumes 3 and 4 earlier. I just hadn't, they had just never sort of bubbled up in the TBR pile. So yeah, I'm glad we're doing this today.
Well, what's the first thing you read that you want to shout out?
Sure. So we had mentioned this in our playlist for shut-ins. That was sort of the week. Image had a couple of big releases come out, and one of them was Mirka Andolfo's Mercy.
Mm.
Mirka Andolfo created this comic book called Unnatural that I talked about last year, and that was a supremely weird comic, and there was it's hard to say hype, but it's like I guess she had has done a lot of books like with other collaborators and stuff, but it has just been building up that enthusiasm around her own creator-owned works. And so as I went back to look up stuff on Mercy, I actually found out like there was an announcement at San Diego Comic Con last year. Like this was like hyped, like, hey, it's another creator book from Mirka Andolfo. So this first issue came out, and the reason we talked about it in March was because Image was they were hyping the fact that this had sold out in its first print run. So I was not able to get my hands on a physical copy of it before the lockdown started. But I did grab it on Comixology, and it is a 6-issue limited series. They have only published issue 1 so far, and I don't know what the holdup is, but I assume it may have something to do with that's interesting. Just learned some news as I scrolled down the page. I thought this was a holdup from Diamond because it had such a great print run. I am now seeing that 2 and 3, or 2 was released this month, and 3 is coming up in about a week on May 6th. But number 2 is not available on Comixology, so that's interesting to know.
That is interesting.
So because that's how I was going. I was checking Comixology all the time. But if you, for any reason, remember what I said about Unnatural. Unnatural was this strange dystopian future of the government controlling who could reproduce when, and sort of putting a literal biological clock in place. Like if you were not married by 24, then you had to participate in a government-run dating program, like basically an OkCupid that the government controlled, and they would find a mate for you to reproduce with. So it had all these like dystopian Handmaid's Tale kind of elements to it, but the entire world was populated with anthropomorphic animals. So it was centered around a pig girl. And in this, so it's a really crazy fantasy world that Unnatural takes place in. Mercy could not be farther away from that. Like it is grounded Victorian Gothic horror. And I had been unfamiliar with Mirka Andolfo prior to reading Unnatural. I think she's an Italian artist, but I know she's done work on like Bombshells and some big like swords and sorcery fantasy kind of series for DC and other publishers. So, she's got like a lot of experience on everything. This is like her take on an Edgar Allan Poe tale, and it is super cool because of that, because she just has this really flowy way of drawing that's not superhero-y, but it's definitely not like really super indie comic or anything. It's kind of a mix of a pinup drawing and like a manga illustration, and the colors in Mercy are just like all these really rich dark blue hues that are then offset by bright pinks and reds and stuff to show off the blood.
I'm seeing those on the cover. Is that what I can expect on a panel by panel basis too?
It's definitely like a broader palette within, but it feels so it just feels like such a great take on that era, that like I said Poe, but like, as I'm flipping through and I see these villains that have the sort of scruffy beards and the bowler hats, and they look very like Dickensian sort of, like, the roughnecks of good old Victorian days. A lot of women with lace veils over their faces, and men in top hats and pork pies and stuff like that. But along with that is this kind of American tale of like there's one of the first characters we're introduced to is a girl who's I think her father is a Native American and her mother is Irish, and so she was raised Catholic. So you're only kind of getting hints in the first issue of what, like, how this all ties together. But right off the bat, like just a couple pages in, you're sort of like realizing like, oh, religion's going to be a big part of this. This is very much in that Gothic tradition. It is for sure heavily like she's telling a story like, in obviously like very conscious of present day and all this kind of stuff. So it is like a multicultural tale. The women are very empowered and like, have their own agency and stuff. It's not a take on like Victorian Gothic literature told in that same style, of like men being the protagonists and stuff like that. And so far what I can see is that there are sort of three prime women that the story's gonna circulate around. But I don't really know more than that. It's pretty cool. This is one of those titles where I'm sure I would appreciate it when it's all collected, but I'm glad to be reading it issue by issue, especially during days like this where I just, I kind of want to check into a story, get to the next chapter, and then check out for a while. So, yeah.
So you've only read issue 1, right?
I have.
I love that it's Mirka Andolfo's Mercy, like in all the titles and all the meta information everywhere, which I didn't realize she was the writer and the artist. So you might as well, if you're going to put, if you are, it doesn't look like there's any collaboration up until like maybe the variant covers on that. So it's kind of, but it's just kind of fun to see that, when you first mentioned it, I was like, people don't typically put their own names in their titles, but she does. And it's a cool name.
Like seriously, like it's like I'm breaking news to myself. I'm seeing on the Image website that this is available on Comixology issue 2, and I have looked for it so many times because I bought this several weeks ago when we had that first conversation about like the playlist for shut-ins, and I was like, you know what, I'm not going to go out to a comic book shop anytime soon. Let me pick this up. So it's definitely got all the touchstones that I wanted in a Victorian Gothic tale. The little girl who is half Native and half Irish is an orphan, and she's like put to hard labor by this townsfolk, this man that's sort of like, he represents to the town that he's like helping out all these orphans, but it's really just slave labor for his own factory. And it's got the two aristocratic women. One of them seems to have these sort of supernatural gifts or abilities or something.
This is all the first issue?
Yup.
You just keep reading. Like I'm like, I keep thinking maybe he's describing a series, but like, wait, no. He's only read the first issue. Like is it an extra sized issue?
I honestly, as I was reading it, it was one of those weird experiences where I thought, oh, maybe this is like the whole story. Maybe it's one, it's smaller than a trade paperback. But no, it was just 30 pages. So it's only 6 pages longer, I think, than a normal story. I mean, it's there's a lot packed in there, but there's not a lot of the overarching story. This issue 1 is really introducing you to the cast of characters and how they interact. Learning that I think her name is Lady Helene, who's the aristocratic woman. Well, no, that is I believe someone else.
But that character appears on, looks like all the maybe all the covers.
Yes, there's a redheaded aristocratic lady. I believe that's Lady Helene. That's
okay.
Oh, sorry, I'm thinking her name is Lady Swanson. Gosh, oh my gosh, too much stuff.
Is she kind of like, is she like a Mina Harker sort of character in this, like circa League of Extraordinary Gentlemen? Is that sort of, because I'm looking at these covers, I'm instantly reminded of another series called Lady Mechanica that is drawn. Yeah, but the art looks oddly similar, but it has a intriguing lady Victorian character as the lead too. I'm just sort of I'm kind of wondering if that's sort of a new genre now. This sort of, not doesn't have to be steampunk specifically, but Victorian era, female heroines, antagonists, whatever you want to say.
Interesting. I'm unfamiliar with the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but
What?
yeah.
Whoa!
But I can see it in what I know of that era. It is that, although I keep saying it's Victorian Gothic, that's like right off the back cover of the book. So I
got to go back to, I'm not familiar. Are you serious? You have not read League of Extraordinary Gentlemen yet?
I just thought it was a awesome action-packed movie with Sean Connery.
No, you didn't.
I have never read it, nor have I seen the movie.
Oh my God, we're gonna have to fix that then. I deliberately am gonna choose that as probably my next book to discuss on the show, because there is a wealth of literary references throughout that entire story that I think you would appreciate. But then Alan Moore goes deep, very, very deep.
That's what it's Alan Moore, right? That hat.
Yeah, some of it just, you feel like he's just showing off. It's just like
Well, it's available to borrow, Volume 1. So
yeah, there you go.
Borrowed. Yeah. I update. Issue number 2 of Mercy is not on Comixology. When you click the Comixology link on Image, it says, so yeah, okay. I don't feel bad for not being caught
Maybe
up.
Comixology does this thing now where if a thing sells out physically, they stop selling it digitally just to mirror the real world. Wouldn't that be cool? It's like,
I can see that Image sort of preloaded their website with the schedule, and then all this crap went down with Diamond, which you and I don't have a lot of insight into, but Diamond is essentially the only distributor of all comic books all over the States, and I think into Europe as far as like England, I think. I'm not totally sure, and a bunch of game supplies, and they just and totally justifiable that they would shut down in the pandemic. Like, thank God they're not making people go to work and expose themselves to each other, but they have a sort of stranglehold on the industry because of that. So it's wonder,
so absurd.
Yeah, and I wonder if Image is holding the digital release until they know they can have a physical release to match it, because I can imagine so much of their income is probably based on issue 2 selling out after issue 1 does,
True, yeah.
Like, if we've all read it digitally, who's going to go pick it up? And which is a real shame. But I don't know a way around that. It could be there's a warehouse. I would imagine there is a warehouse full of issue number 2 and 3. And that's why it's here on the website. But anyway, it's a super cool book. It's like just different enough from her other work that you're interested in reading it, but it's also just got her style in the art. And I should make a note, because I know in the past I've made a less than flattering note that I've read some books where the artist, someone you've known as an artist, becomes the writer to something, and I feel like maybe they shouldn't have been the writer on that. But this one felt really seamless to me.
Nice.
Like, the tone matches in the writing and the art, and I think one of the really notable things to me is sort of in the way the pages are laid out. They're not just laid out like, it's. And I don't know enough about this, like, to talk intelligently about it. I probably shouldn't say anything, but I do feel like in some other works where it's a single creator, you're wishing for like an angle change or something. It's like it feels like all the lines are being delivered in the same like frame kind of thing. And this one I think just moves around. It's like, the camera, if you want to, moves around enough that it keeps it interesting, and so it all just flows together really well, and really enjoyed it.
Very good. I picked up a issue of something that also we were talking about this before too. I don't know for sure if it's sold out, but there was rumor that it had sold out in its first run, and this was a little further back, but not much. I think it was not maybe 3 weeks before Colorado shut down, but I picked up issue 1 of Decorum by Jonathan Hickman and Mike Huddleston, and I picked up the variant edition that I actually posted on Instagram on Friday too. That really, it has kind of like a cool tribal cover. So that's my issue, and I knew after East of West ended that Hickman was starting some other cool new series. when instead he should be finishing his other existing cool series. But
Yeah.
he's a genius, and it's just, let it flow, man. I guess wherever it takes you. But he started. I knew he was going to launch a new series, and there had been some sort of hints about it, but not. It's the comics industry is a little different in that there's not sort of this obsessive need for spoilers before something comes out. Like, you can kind of keep a project a lot more secret. A, because it's a smaller business, but B, there's seldom more than 2 or 3 people involved, so you don't have this kind of food chain of potential leakage or spoilers to for any given project or property. So out comes a series called Decorum, and it is probably the most Hickman thing that has ever existed since Nightly News, which was sort of the previously most Hickman thing that ever existed. And by that I mean he has a certain style of storytelling that he's really gotten into, both in terms of tone and point of view, and East to West did it really well, but you get it in Dying in the Dead a little bit. You get it in Black Monday Murders. You get it in his Marvel stuff too, but it's his indie stuff. He really reflects that. So you get that here, but then it also, Hickman has a lot of design aesthetic things that he started in Nightly News. Things like his infographics.
Yeah.
To give context. Things like the way he stages. Early on he was taking photos of actual people sort of posing, and then he was able to draw, you basically trace around them and flesh out the art side of it, and you can give them enhanced clothing or different things. But it's a lot easier to work when you have these like wonderful, if you're not the best illustrator, you can kind of do all this stuff, and then he layered it into Photoshop in this beautiful kind of graphic designy way. And he did that same thing on Pax Romana, but with a very kind of different take on it. So he's got this kind of unique sense of style, this unique sense of art, artistic design, the infographics, the way, in East of West, he has these great timelines that come and go. And so there's all those pieces to it. And then just this idea of, systems. He loves examining systems and systems that people take for granted, and how to take those systems down and mess with them, whether it's the government or the scientific industrial complex in I just forgot the damn series name that won the World War II science series,
Manhattan. Yeah.
Good Lord. Or the system of the apocalypse in the East of West, the system, the financial system in Black Monday Murders, in terms of his Marvel stuff, kind of what he's doing with X-Men, breaking down the X-Men as their system and building a brand new one. He just loves all of that. Yeah. So, to see that all come together in this book is amazing. So you've got everything that he sort of loves. It's like when Tarantino indulges, like that's kind of what you're feeling like with this. It's like it's all the shit that he likes. But then on top of that, you have an artist in Mike Huddleston who brings a very avant-garde, very, very sort of theatrical or like indie film kind of quality to the art that I have not seen, I don't think ever, maybe since Zero. Zero does it a little bit. It's that great time travel series from about 5 years ago that we've never really talked about, but it's probably going to come up soon. But that book, Zero as a series, is held up a lot by graphic art, really good graphic designers, because the covers are amazing. The interior panels have a different style altogether, and it's fairly consistent. But with Decorum, it's like a combination of really dreamy, amazing watercolor and single like rough sketch like pencil drawings, that have nothing attached to them, and like almost like storyboards, and then like these beautiful like vistas and things with interesting layers of paint. Like he takes completely different styles, but then he'll intertwine like kind of Hickman-y sort of graphic elements on top of it again. So it has kind of, if there is such a thing as a retro, if you think of like 2009, 2010 as like retro Hickman, this kind of has a retro Hickman vibe in that respect. It's interesting. It's just, it's like an amazing, I'm trying to think of like a Bowie album or something that came out in like the 80s or 70s or 80s where you're like, oh my God, this is like everything this artist has done up till date, but like it's all together now. It's like they synthesized.
Are you saying this is a tin machine?
I don't know if Tin Machine is the one I would go for, but yeah.
That's just my favorite Bowie reference. So it looks like Huddleston is the artist in Middle West. Are you reading that series?
I love Middle West. Yes. And it's hard to tell that that's the case. His work in Middle West is wonderful, but it's all consistent. Like it's that same style. It the colors are pretty. The colorist in Middle West is really amazing too. But like this is, and there's some similarity, but the way he draws the characters and decorum are completely different, and just everything about it. I cannot. You really have to open it up and start looking through it. It's like every 2 pages, everything shifts. Like the entire design aesthetic shifts. Sometimes it looks like it's a Frank Miller Dark Knight-esque sort of homage, and then sometimes it's like just very crude, almost like cave drawings. And then early on, my favorite part, what really hooked me in, is early on there is a deliberate visual reference to Jodorowsky's Dune. He includes one of the ships that Chris Foss designed for the movie. Like he basically either includes it as a direct copy or a very, very close amalgamation of a lot of those. Like it's obvious. Like I opened up my Chris Foss book and I found like almost the exact same ship. There's a scene where like these kind of space pirates are invading this preserve. And you see the ship. So that really hooked me to like, oh, this guy loved Jodorowsky's Dune. That's awesome. But just everything is very like the graphic design piece is probably what pulled me in more than the story, at least so far. The story is interesting, but it's very subtle. It's very much kind of world building, and there's not like a really strong thread yet or characters that we should know just yet. So it's definitely going to take its time or just be really kind of abstract like that.
It's hard to, this is a weird question to ask in regards to a Hickman book, especially after East of West, but the fact that the back of the book cover or the copy that's on Image is selling it says there are many assassins in the known universe. Do you feel like the scope of this is broader than, like, is the playground bigger than it ever has been before?
Oh God, yes. In fact, they go to great lengths to like show you these kind of star maps about like where all these different factions are from, and like so they could troll around a large amount of space without any issue.
Cool. And then does it feel more sci-fi in that way, or I mean, how grounded is it in current reality?
I mean, that's the trick. It feels like it's kind of like East to West, which I think was like kind of very grounded post-apocalyptic Western sci-fi. There's a genre for you.
Yeah.
This feels like it's very grounded in like the characters you do get to meet and the dialogue you do hear feels very grounded, very much like this could just be a mob drama in the 1920s. This doesn't have to. So it's almost like the environment is exaggerated to let Mike Huddleston just play and do these crazy things, but it has like this kind of strange Kingsman quality to it too, where like one of the assassins is very much, she's all about politeness and manners and very specific kind of high class dialogue, and you're like, well, that's interesting. Like there's all these interesting things afoot. So I mean, I hope this is one of those series that is also limited, where they don't go on. It should end either with one volume or maybe 2 max. This should not be something that's East to West length. I would hope. I mean, maybe, but like it would get exhausting because of how very sort of innovative it is visually. Gotcha. And how it takes a lot of risks there. To have anything too long would just be, it would become a parody of itself, or Huddleston would just get tired. It just wouldn't feel inventive at that point.
What's interesting me now about this is because I've never read a Hickman series as single issues. When I've dipped into them, it's been an entire volume, and I actually don't really know what that experience is like, because the groundedness that we speak of has to do a lot with, like, at least in my mind, yes, East of West feels sort of grounded in its own crazy ass way, because there is such like a deep history that he has done to build that world. So it's like, this crazy stuff is happening, but what transpired over the last 100 years that got them to this place.
Here's the main difference. So East of West, the world is already grounded. It's our world. Like he goes to great lengths to say this is the history, up until like what 19, 18, like
Well, it's a
60,
Civil War. Yeah, it's like
whenever the
1860.
meteor
Yeah.
hits, right? And then everything from that point on deviates, but it still comes from our own base reality. So
Right.
the environment can be grounded, but the circumstances can be crazy, which they are, right? In this, I almost feel like the environment is crazy and the circumstances. I mean, so far it's just a bog standard assassin, like mafia assassination sort of plot. Like that's all it is. It could that's a grounded story we've seen 100,000 times. So it's like it's almost like a flip on itself from east to west in that regard. So you get that same dissonance, but it's the inside.
That's
It's
cool.
the other way around.
That's cool because so then you're sort of you're able to get at that because just to be honest, I think one of the things that's prevented me from getting into East of West is because you do have to do sort of a lot of work in reading those first couple volumes to kind of get to sort of feel like I've got the whole history established to where I can get into the story. And you've mentioned several times on this podcast a thing that I have not done, which is you read that East of West of the World.
Yeah, that was the first thing I read.
Which helped get you into it because it was like you already understood the world when you picked up volume 1, and my experience was much different because it was like I would flip. I got to volume 2, I remember, and being like, wait, what is happening? I got to go back and remind myself of what was in volume 1, but then that wasn't even, it hadn't even been explained there. It's sort of like Hickman's already writing with this. He's already got the foreknowledge of like his whole history, but you're having to catch up. So I honestly literally just bought this on Comixology as I'm talking to you.
You should. Yeah.
And
it's pretty. But here's the thing, you're going to want to own it physically too, just because as a product of the comics medium, like you owe it to yourself and to have it physically. Like it just has, it has that sort of quality where you just get the artifact. It's just, I think even maybe more so than the digital. The way Huddleston does the art, there's a very kinetic kind of quality to it that I think in physical form is probably a little even heightened.
Well, we talk about like digital versus physical all the time, and honestly, and then a thing that we hopefully haven't talked about too much because Lord knows, like we've all can't escape the pandemic talk, but I think one of the things that is maybe a positive effect of that, of being at home so much, is that I am realizing like I can't indulge in the bigger thing. So reading a single issue is like bringing me a lot more joy than maybe usually feeling like. Usually to me, single issues aren't actually single issues. They are a pile of single issues that I feel like I have to get through the whole pile, Mm-hmm. So I'm being forced to take some time and space to just sort of live with single issues. So this may be a great time for me to start reading Hickman issue by issue with decorum. Yeah. It looks like it's in the same position as Mercy, where it did sell out that first week, which was March 11th. So you can imagine like that was the week of the school shutdown in California, and Diamond soon after. And I bet they're just holding on it. So we have another like thing that we want to jump into, another book, but we would be remiss if we did not mention that on Humble Bundle, which is humblebundle.com, which is this crazy service, if you don't know about it, where they donate to charity by giving you the opportunity to sort of pay what you want for a bundle of work. And a lot of times this is video game related, but there is a Jonathan Hickman Humble Bundle right now. You can get every volume of East of West up to like 9, I think. You can get the 6 volumes of Manhattan Project. You can get like, I think it's 6 volumes of Dying in the Dead. You get some single issues in there. You get the Nightly News, Black Monday Murders Volume 1 and 2. All of this for a $15 donation, which is ludicrous. So I sent that to you, and in my mind, I was like, you know what? I've given Hickman a chance. I don't really. Yeah, and then I'm looking at it right now, like going $15 for all of this digitally. Like, why would I not do that? Like, then every time you talk about Red Mass for Mars or Red Wing or Pax Romana's in there too.
Well, Red Mass for Mars, I'm not going to talk about again because I have promised myself 3 times burned. Fool me once. What was the George W. Bush version of that? It's like,
won't get fooled again.
Fool me, don't get fooled again. Like that's kind of where I am with Red Mass for Mars. Hey, I gotta point out too, Mike Huddleston. I completely missed the fact that he was a artist on House of X. So I
Nice.
would think that his stuff in Decorum is a little more House of X-y in terms of how he draws his characters than Middle West.
Okay,
But,
that makes sense.
yeah, but again, I can't stress that it is, even if you flip through some of the preview pages on Image, like this is a very different looking book than you have ever seen before. Like it'll require some patience to really sit with and kind of understand how the art is, I think, more the story than the actual words themselves.
Well, I'm looking forward to getting into it on Comixology after we stop recording.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a smooth transition, maybe not. When you texted me about this next book that we were going to discuss, you specifically called out how guided view made it so easy to binge this series, which I think is a really cool idea.
Yeah. Well, let's be clear. I'm going to name check a series because this is sort of going back to the thing I mentioned earlier when I went down my rabbit hole on Friday evening. I just got it in my head. I'm like, I have not read Injustice: Gods Among Us all the way through since I first acquired each issue or volume back in 2014. And this is one of those. This is actually, we've talked about it a few times. This is one of the things that pulled me into comics pretty heavily.
Yeah.
It was Watchmen was kind of like the big thing, and then there were two kind of ongoing series that, because Comixology had just come out and the app was great, I actually just consumed both of these things via Comixology. One was the Masters of the Universe run, where it was the Eternity War and all of that, those kinds of things. That was one of them, and the other one was Injustice: Gods Among Us. And I did not realize, for some bizarre reason, I didn't realize it was a game first, and then they decided to launch the series to support what happened. What were the events that led to the game, right? And so that came later, and then they actually used that to bridge to the second game, and all of that followed. But I didn't realize that at first. I thought this was just a cool kind of what if Elseworlds thing that DC was just really running with.
We've name checked it several times over the years. So I may have learned that fact before, but at this moment, it feels like fresh information to me that that this came after the game.
That was just my own ignorance. Like, I mentioned that to some other people. They're like, wait, you didn't know there was a game? I'm like, no, and they're like, the game is actually pretty cool.
You didn't even know there was a game.
I didn't know, not when I first started reading this. And the the game only just makes you go, well, how the hell did all this come to be? And that has to be a really interesting story. And so in the game, if you're not familiar, a group of Elseworlds Justice League members come to another version of Earth, and they have to fight Superman and Wonder Woman and try to take them down, because they become basically corrupt and evil and have taken over, become authoritarian dictators of Earth, essentially. Okay. And I forget who's all on the team at that point. And then you're like, so you play the game so you can have hero versus hero in these kind of high stakes ways.
Gotcha.
Well, the series spends 5 years. Oh, my iPad keeps launching every time that I say the word series. The series gives you the 5 years that lead up to that, those conditions. And so I jumped in. And I just I thought I'd maybe just read volume 1 or 2, which I think is year 1, because every year is 24 separate issues. So it's like great.
Holy crap! Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! For whatever reason, I thought this was like a mini series. Like, I thought it was 6 issues total.
And the first Injustice: Gods Among Us was 5 years, but they've sequelized the series now too, so it's gone on long. It's probably another 50 to 100 issues.
Oh my lord!
Thing too, which I haven't even cracked. But every year is 24 issues, which it kind of feels like a TV series. But each issue is, you can crank through them so quickly, and not because they're cheaply made or anything, but just because on guided view, the action flows so nicely from panel to panel. You're just swiping like crazy, and you can just crank through these things. Especially the second time through, you can crank through pretty fast. So I was maybe a year every 90 minutes. I was getting through, and it was just this really wholly satisfying experience, especially being able to go, because they used to take breaks in between years, right? I think every year was a year of the actual calendar. Was that right? 2014 was year 3.
And if they were doing 24 issues per year, that's every 2 weeks they're releasing something, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Although maybe year one maybe they were doing it monthly and it took 2 years.
I know they were doing it every week, and
Oh
then
my gosh.
but I think they take these breaks, like 6-month breaks in between. They launch another year. So this is the first time I got to read everything kind of back to back, and I went all the way up until year 5, and and it's interesting because I can tell I didn't even buy up past like issue 19. I have since I decided to complete year 5, but even when I was still engaged in this, something happens in year 5 where everything just takes a massive dump in terms of the storytelling. Let me just I before I continue, I should probably set this all up. And this is a pretty big sprawling series, but you kind of need to know the hook is why Superman starts to go evil in the first place. And it happens in issue 1, year 1. And it's they're basically trying to stop the Joker from like a routine, the Justice League is trying to stop the Joker from a routine sort of thing. He's going to blow up I think Metropolis. But he has somehow drugged Superman into thinking that that Doomsday is coming to kill him. And so he grabs, Superman grabs Doomsday and he launches into space and lets Doomsday go. And as it's happening, he realizes it's not Doomsday. He's been drugged to think that Lois Lane is Doomsday, and he just killed her in space. And oh, by the way, she was carrying his kid. So and then on top of that, they didn't, he chose the wrong thing. So the Metropolis explodes, just completely blows up. So basically he killing jokes Superman, and it works. And Superman comes back down and immediately murders the Joker. And Batman goes, holy shit, what did you just do? And suddenly there's a divide between Batman and Superman over morality, and everybody kind of falls in behind one of those two guys. And it kicks off 5 years of war between these two factions that pulls in everybody from the entire Green and Yellow Lantern Corps to Trigon to Mr. Mxyzptlk to all the Greek gods and Themyscira. Like every the magical world comes into it. Like everything is impacted by this. So many characters die or are murdered throughout the whole thing.
Now, are they killing off main named characters?
Oh yes, left and right. Yeah.
So is it just widely understood as soon as you start reading like this is not canon in that way?
It's pretty clear that this is not like a New 52 canonized thing, because this would have been coming out during New 52.
Yeah.
It's an Elseworlds series, but it's so robust that it feels like it's a really fleshed out canon, because it's just
right.
Having so many issues over so much time, and there's a lot of interesting little sub stories that tie in, but everything is consumed by this. The entire DC universe, even like Darkseid and the New Gods, are all consumed by this one event on Earth, which is this fraction between these two teams. And so it really makes the video game 1,000 times more worth it when you're playing it, knowing this was the history and this is how everything kind of shook out the way it did in the game. So years 1 and 2 are awesome. Years 3, 4, equally good, but there's a new writer who takes over, so that it kind of changes a little bit tonally. And then year 5, just, oh God, it's painful.
It's really.
It's just, I don't know what happened, but man, it's like they ran out of it's like year 4 ends on such an epic note that anything after that was just like, why bother? Like, why have another? So just don't understand that going in. And then where was the artists do change. So every maybe 6, I would say 6 issues, another artist takes over. So you get some repeats. So you do get some consistency in style. They do try to maintain as much continuity as they can just from visual cues and things, but you do get a shift, like in the way they draw Superman, that kind of affects the tone now and then. And there's some artists who are clearly much better than others, like just in terms of the skill. So you kind of have like these runs where like these runs of 6 or so issues where it just feels like it's really clicking on all levels, and then it gets a little clunky, but it's still worth, still addicted to reading through it, because you can just because of the way guided view works, it just, every panel pulls you in, and you don't feel like you're even through 5 books already before it's already like 20 minutes.
Now to run for that long, as an Elseworld series, that's more than like what we think of as like event books,
Mm-hmm.
uh, do you think it's more, does it become more soap opera about the relationships, or
Oh
is it
God,
like,
yes.
okay, so it's
No,
not just like heavy action all the time, like huge
no.
battles.
I
Okay.
mean, there's some great action, but no. Even the pacing works very much like a soap opera. Like,
Gotcha.
and that's kind of how. Again, I don't hate. I'm not knocking it in terms of quality, but every issue is instantly digestible because it is so, like, they do that little recap at the beginning of each issue, like, last time, like, I love you, Marlena. No, John. It's got that sort of,
Right.
but like you end up spending an entire issue on like 5 minutes between characters. Like time moves as slowly as they want it to, and then they'll
Okay.
just instantly catch up again to get us like 3 weeks later. It's like, oh, okay, all right. We
Hmm.
have to jump ahead. I mean, because that amount of time does pass. You actually see Damian Wayne grow older as each year
Interesting.
progresses, which is kind of fun.
Do you feel like was it sort of, do you think they had the 5 years planned out when they started publishing it? Like, was it sort of like, hey, here's where we need to get to, and here's how we're going to do it, like outline year by year? Because it's interesting that you say it declines in the fifth year, which means that you never really read it up to where the game starts. Although you didn't come in from the game, so maybe you don't care. But
I mean, over the weekend, I finally did catch up on those last 5 issues.
oh, okay.
And they could have done that. They could have done all of year 5 in 3 issues and been done. Like, there's just,
Yeah.
we don't need to see like 6 or 7 issues in a row of like the clone sort of
Right.
dumb Superman just sort of flying around, like getting into madcap adventures in Germany. It's like, I liken it to the era, to the episodes of Dragon Ball Z where we have to watch Goku get a job. It's like, we don't need this. This is not helping anything. We don't need to know this part of Goku's life. Just, we don't know. We don't care. So it's not, I would say, to answer your question, every year definitely was outlined ahead of time. So like, I'm guessing in
Yeah.
those gaps in between, they're like, okay, we're gonna outline year 2. Okay, this will be the Lantern Corps, Guardians of the Universe sort of year, and here are the characters. Here's your
Right.
won't appear. I would be surprised if they had all 5 mapped out ahead of time, because every year feels like, what haven't they done yet? Okay, we'll do this now. It feels there. It's very much built around themes. Like year 1 is, all the Justice League characters you ever want to see. Year 2 is all the, Green Lantern and adjacent characters you ever want to see. And like that whole mythology. Year 3 is all the magic and like demonic and other, and that kind of characters you ever, it's very magic tinged. Year 4 is all the Greek gods, all the new gods, all of, all of those just higher celestial being kinds of things.
So it almost feels like an event book for a different portion of the universe every year.
yeah. That's an interesting way, but just a very long one, because that's 24 issues is 2 trade paperbacks probably.
Yeah, that's well, and maybe more than that if they're going with the 6 issues per book. And one thing I wanted to get back to is like when you talk about the guided view being so seamless, and this was, at least I had to look it up, it looks like it was originally published in 2013. So that to me is kind of the power of the big two. It's like when they got into digital, they started doing it right. And or we've talked about issues we've had. I know it wasn't like it didn't always work great for everyone. I know some of the early frustrations I talked about were DC and Marvel books, where they hadn't quite gotten the guided view working yet.
Well, hey, big difference, and something that endeared me to Comixology early on. And actually, wow, this is a revelation, because this is actually what tipped me into Image to begin with. So check this out. When Injustice and He-Man both, when Masters of the Universe both were coming out on Comixology, there were no ads except for like one insert at the very beginning, so that you have like the cover and like an insert for like some ad of some kind, and then that's it until the very, very end. You had like one other ad, and then like the final like back cover. So you weren't like, it didn't break it up, whereas the printed editions it did. So if you bought those single issues in the store, you were getting like page ad, page ad. The typical
right. Yeah.
big two sort of way of laying out their single issues, which drives me nuts. So I was just like, just by that alone going, well, shoot, I'll buy these always on Comixology. I also really think some of those panels were designed knowing that Comixology was kind of their preference in terms of medium.
Yeah.
Because they are set up in such a way that you're like, I could see this being, they just feel more effective digitally than they do in print. Like you have more, I don't know, just the way they flow together and the way there's some symmetry between panels changing. You see, like, if you have one panel at a time, it's fading in, a character's head placement is either a mirror or a complete duplicate of the head placement the next time. And it does a lot of really interesting things that way. But here, knowing that, that when I did finally go back into the store again, I actually, and interestingly, I think I started really going back into stores to find the omnibus collections of these Gods Among Us books. They hadn't gotten that far along yet to really do an omnibus. Now they have them, for every year, and I think you can get all 5 years in one gigantic Gutenberg Bible copy. But I was going in for that, and then I was just seeing these really cool single issues on the wall, and I'm like, wait, Image, Boom, like these indie studios, but a lot of them were Image titles, no ads at all. I was like, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Then I wonder if it wasn't that really kind of pushed me into indie books to begin with, specifically Image. Just this idea that I was so used to having this amazing experience digitally with Gods Among Us that that I wanted in a physical sense. I never thought about that before.
Huh. That's really interesting too. And I love thinking of the gateway books that like got you into something else, because I think of that, what reinvigorated my interest a lot were those Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale books that we talk about. So yeah, it's Batman and it's DC, but they looked so different from what I expected from DC that was like where it went like, hey, it's okay to get back into superhero books, it's not all going to look like Marvel's Civil War, which is a series that I don't feel like I could talk about because I've never completed it, but it was like it was a big turnoff for me in the day when the first Civil War came out. Like I just didn't like the look of it or the feel of the books, or I remember picking up the floppies and going like, oh, I hate the way comics feel now. So slick and digital. So it's really cool that we've gotten to this place. Before you talked about how Injustice brought you back into the comic book store to get the physical editions, I was thinking like, wow, I wonder if there's this super freedom in a series like that for one of the big two publishers where they go, hey, this is not going to be canon. Let's experiment all we want with guided view and everything. Like that might have been what they needed to kind of like get it all together with their developers, like, because they almost don't care. I'm surprised that there are omnibus editions of it, but I guess people came to love the series so much that there's really a demand for that.
I mean, I actually I have a physical copy of Year One, as like, it's not hardcover, it's like a floppy version. I'm probably going to end up donating it or giving it away to listeners at some point. And it's great. It's a beautiful, beautiful copy, but it's just like, comparing it, the physical experience of reading this book is just not as satisfying. So I'm just kind of like, I don't know if I want all of these sitting on my shelf, knowing that I will only ever probably read it on Comixology anyway.
Right,
so it's kind of that, in a lot of situations I've mentioned before, being a completist, I have the Multiversity on Comixology. I have the Multiversity in its hardcover, kind of deluxe edition. I have the Multiversity in every single individual issue.
Oh boy.
Because it's like it, a lot of it's the way that book works. You kind of do want to have it all because it's kind of part of the story to do that. But like, I don't just see that happening with this. It's just, I enjoyed it digitally first. Just kind of feels better. You compare it in contrast. I just don't see it working as well. And the other thing too is that there's so many panels on the physical page. It gets a little visually exhausting. So I noticed I didn't read it as quickly as I did when I'm just like, literally fingering through panels, breakneck speed, but it flows like a movie. It feels like, an actual, like, almost want to put a Hans Zimmer score behind it, just to kind of match the pace. Yeah,
that's, that's it. I mean, as our current situation continues, like one of the things on my mind is how to downsize a little bit. So I don't feel like I have such a physical, like footprint. And so comic books is something I'm taking a really hard look at, and especially single issues, and seeing if, why am I keeping a bunch of these single issues, and should I upgrade to trade paperbacks? although that doesn't reduce my physical footprint, but it collects it a little bit more
Yeah.
neatly.
Yeah.
Or is it worth going to Comixology for some of those things? Or, it's just one of those things that's on my mind. So it's fun to talk about things that you own in three different formats.
I don't do that for everything. I
Oh,
mean,
exactly. Yeah.
there's some limited things like that, but like that was one of those series where I'm like, I need it in every format. Another really good one is Black Monday Murders, just because
Right.
you kind of want those single issues, almost like they're case briefs. It just kind of feels like that.
Yeah.
What else
I
do I
got
have? Oh,
I
go
got
ahead.
another Injustice follow up for you, which is in that soap opera-y way. Uh, um, what characters did you find standing out to you that maybe you didn't expect, like
Oh,
that
there's
are
an
in the
interesting
DC universe?
question. They give Harley Quinn a lot of fun, interesting stuff to do, and I think up until that point, we
Hmm.
hadn't seen a Margot Robbie movie yet.
Yeah, she
We
wasn't a
had
very three-dimensional character up until that point.
yeah, and we hadn't seen White Knight yet, which I think is my favorite version of Harley Quinn. But it's actually two versions, and you get two for the price of one. But that hadn't come out yet. So yeah, this was the first time I kind of got to see Harley Quinn have all these like it just very she had a lot of interactions with a lot of characters and kind of evolves a lot through this because she was there when the Joker did all that to Superman. She was there with the Joker. She was like by his side, and I think she even was sort of freaked out by all that. And then obviously he
Hmm.
gets murdered, so she's like, "Oh shoot!" And then she kind of has to go through that existential crisis of not having Mr. J around. Other than
Yeah,
her, um, wow, Hal Jordan comes off looking like a total dickhead. Yeah, you hate Hal Jordan all the more, for all the right reasons, by the way. Who else though? I'm trying to think who else I didn't feel like I. Oh, I would say Doctor Fate and John Constantine probably too. Like those guys get a lot of FaceTime in the third year, and I didn't know a lot about Doctor Fate at that point in time. So that was
Hmm.
you get more of a sense of who he is and what he sort of stands for and what he's able to do. More of his voice anyway, and then I think a lot of those third year characters. Yeah, Constantine. Up till that point, I didn't realize was sort of I always sort of had and forgive me, but I sort of had Keanu Reeves in my mind as like Constantine because that was the only sort of
Yeah.
exposure to Constantine I had prior to seeing him in this, and then since this we have him on TV, we have him in like animated movies, like there's a lot more now to draw on, but this is kind of my first
Interesting.
exposure to Constantine, and it feels like I'm missing somebody key. I'm trying to think of who that is. Like you get all your basic your ba-
Hawkman.
I mean, he shows up I mean, he's just as one-dimensional as he's probably ever been.
Well, it's funny because what you talking about this reminded me. I was thinking of those other sort of non-canon DC works. Although maybe this is canon. A book I don't think we've maybe ever mentioned on the podcast that I really enjoyed called Identity Crisis, which was this sort of murder mystery 7-issue series that they did, where this like kind of pulp crime novelist, or like the John Grisham of novels. This guy named Brad Metzler. I just pulled it up. I can't remember what his last name is. Um, Meltzer. He wrote it for DC, so it was like an interesting thing where they pulled in like a novelist and said, "Hey, can you write like a crime novel for DC?" And it's one of those where there are all these character moments of like the Atom and Elongated Man and people that you aren't really familiar with. So thinking of Injustice, where it's like, hey, it's literally the whole universe of characters.
Yeah.
That's what's sparked that question was like, oh yeah, I bet you get to see some really interesting character moments from people you don't normally follow when they mix up like that much. So yeah.
What is I mean, there's a whole lot of time with Ares, and it's really fun to like read Ares now in the voice of oh god, what's his face who plays him in the movie? Oh shoot.
Ares, like the god of war.
Yeah, yeah.
In oh my god,
The guy from
dude.
Harry Potter. What the hell's his name? The actor's
Yeah,
name. Oh my
Professor
Christ.
Lupin.
Yes,
um
that. But oh god, his name's right on the tip of my tongue.
I'll,
Anyway,
I'll get it.
you look at yeah.
I don't want to. I'm not even gonna look it up. It's got to come to me naturally.
It's interesting that like I now retroactively add his
Thewlis,
voice.
David Thewlis.
David Thewlis,
Boom.
thank
Nailed
you,
it.
prominently. I add his voice to like Ares now when I read it in like comics. It's interesting and there's a lot of fun Ares stuff. I feel
Huh.
like Ganthet had some interesting things. Eh,
Well, there's
I,
another big, huge DC team up that we should talk about sometime, which is the big. Oh my gosh, like Brightest Day. Weren't you a big fan of that, or Darkest Night, or one or
Darkest
the
Night.
other?
Yeah, no,
Okay,
Darkest Night.
yeah, because I don't know much about the Green Lantern Corps or
Oh
anything like
man,
that,
I
and
can
so
roll
it's.
deep. I can go
I
deep.
know, I
For
know.
some reason, for some weird reason, of all the corners of the DC universe, the Green Lantern, everything about the Green Lantern Corps and like all the associated corps and that whole mythology, I love that for some reason. And it's like the Darkest Night, the whole origin of the White Lantern, like all of that, I can roll pretty deep on all things Green Lantern.
I know, and in the early days of this podcast, I remember like being startled by that. Like you would you would quote something from the Green Lantern Corps, and I was like, "Whoa, that is deep." I don't know any of it, so
I don't know
yeah.
what but when I think objectively about them, like what is it about it that, and I can't think of anything other than it's just cool that there's a color for every core's got their own color, and it's kind of like Voltron. That's the only thing I can draw. I'm like, why else am I attracted to this? The idea of manifesting stuff from your ring, I guess. But it just seems like there's other aspects of the DC universe that should appeal to me more, but for some reason, do you know anything about Kyle Rayner and the White Lantern?
Only from what you have told me.
That's probably the most interesting story because there's an amazing book that we've talked on this podcast about Mr. Miracle and Vision as being sort
Yeah.
of these very heavy kind of adult, serious kind of graphic novels, but with these Marvel characters that have been very mainstream. DC did that same thing with the White Lantern in a book called, and I'm scrolling furiously through Comixology trying to find it because I forgot the name of it too. I'm having a massive brain fart this afternoon, Todd. There we go. The Omega Men. So the Omega Men is this great series that came out in 2015, 2016, and it's all about the White Lantern, and it's as good and as deep as the Vision and Mr. Miracle books are.
Man, that's really cool.
Yeah.
There's another one for me to look into.
I've broken you. You mentioned something else and asked me if I read Darkest Day or Brightest Night. You were gonna.
No. I was just going into like you digging into Injustice means that we should probably do episodes on those things, like to dig into a lot of those bigger series. We have yet to do like an episode on House of X, Powers of X, which I have not actually read, although I have it. So. We've got a lot of possible to-dos ahead of us.
Yeah, we should. I think we should dig deep on some like genre stuff soon. Like either pick like a DC or Marvel, pick a month and be like, hey, it's all Marvel May, or it's all DC June, or something to that effect. Where that's all we do, because we rightfully give a lot of love to indie publishers, specifically like 2 or 3, and I kind of want to make sure we're really fleshing out the DC Marvel side of our chat. Not that we don't. We do those from time to time, but I feel like there's so many books that I'm even just scrolling through Comixology, like, God, we haven't talked about that. We haven't talked about that. Like, there's so much DC Marvel stuff that I could roll on. And
I agree. And it's funny too, because we think that, but we're probably about half and half. As much as we think that we lean indie, I bet if we went back through our episodes, it's and a lot of that may just be me, because I feel like I bring up mainstream books a lot. Yeah. But when I was scrolling through my Comixology, as you were as well, and it's almost like row for row, like one is all indie and then one is all Marvel. So yeah.
Wait, on Comixology, how do you organize your library when you click like hit refine?
It's by most recent added.
And are you by books or by series?
Oh, by series.
By series, okay.
Yeah.
It's too bad you can't like sort by publisher. That'd be cool. Like book series publisher. Or book series author. It'd be better yet.
Boy, we're falling into the weeds here, which probably means that we should wrap it up and say that all of these episodes we are referring to can be found at panelism.inc. That is a real website address, and we are on Instagram as panelism.inc. Where Taylor posts you're staying on top of it in a way that I never have. So that's cool. And do we want to sum up what we talked about today? Go to image check on Mirka Andolfo and Jonathan Hickman. Go to Humble Bundle and check out Jonathan Hickman. I know what I meant to say. Thank you for stalling, brain. We brought up I saw an interesting thing this week. Like, so you had posted on Instagram about the last book we discussed, Why Art, and the creator kind of chimed in the comments with a thanks for us covering it, and it made me think of how we ought to be looking these days for ways that we can support these creators directly, if it means buying the book from them or supporting them on Patreon or something. I don't have those things specifically for Mirka and Hickman, but anything you're doing to like help out those creators who are often just freelance artists who don't have jobs to lose in this economy. They just don't have the job. So
I think Hickman's doing pretty well for himself, though.
Yeah, he's probably okay.
He and Kirkman are probably okay.
Yeah. But we'll do our best to highlight where you can specifically support indie creators by buying directly from them or something like that. So
lovely idea.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
I just picture.
I
pictured them having the garage full of their book, when it came out, and they're like, "Yeah, I'll take 200 copies to sell," and then it's like, "Oh crap!"
Like sad indie artists from the early '90s,
like the indie musicians, where you're like, "I got a garage full of CDs."
You have to buy your own remainder from your label back in those days.
Exactly. Yeah.
God, that's a podcast we should ponder, just like music business tales, because I feel like. I could rant at, the shit, the stuff you and I saw in Nashville alone, and some of that stuff we saw together, but a lot of it was sort of different experiences. Like that could be interesting.
Well, I would like to know how it's affecting the comic book artists these days. That was a main theme when we started this podcast, was like, is the comics industry going to make every mistake that the music industry makes on its way to digitalization? And we used to say yes, and it does seem like they really turned a corner fairly quickly and adapted. But I don't know how that impacts the artist. So, God, this is the part of the podcast where I'm just going to start fading the volume out.
Wait, but here's an interesting question, and this may necessitate a whole other episode, and that's fine. But the one thing you can't say about the music business is that they are. I mean, like if they hadn't transitioned to digital when they had, their business would still be based on having to go drive to a place to pick up a piece of plastic to play the music. Right? Like that doesn't exist anymore. Like one of the most recession-proof businesses is Spotify at the moment, because it's just like, and that revenue just keeps going. Not that
for
artists.
Spotify.
Yeah, exactly. but I understand that there's not every artist is directly benefiting from Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. But it's like the industry itself is operating almost exclusively now off this licensing and streaming revenue from various sources. Comics never did that, and I don't. We've talked for great lengths about digital versus physical and the benefits and weaknesses of each. So it's like you can't just say, well, there shouldn't be music, comic stores. Absolutely, there should be. There needs to continue to be comic stores. So it's a very different animal. I just wish those stores weren't exclusively fulfilled by one company who can basically turn the lever off and on at their will. That seems,
or by force majeure, something happens in the world that prevents them from doing their business, and all of a sudden everybody has to shut down because Diamond can't deliver. Like that is a huge problem, which was, like you point out, was probably going to be the case. Like I think music used to have one particular distributor as well, like, and if that had shut down back
there were two at that point. It was Handelman, and then I forget the other one, but they were the ones that distributed like Best Buy and Walmart,
right,
that stuff.
So you can imagine if that were the way we counted on to get our music, it would just be gone right now. Oh boy, strange times.
Strange times indeed. Well, that's all there will be for me on this.
For now. We'll get into it. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for hanging around. And the music has probably already trailed off at this point.
I hope so. Happy reading, everybody. If you're still listening, happy reading. Enjoy your life. Liberty.
Take care.
Happiness.
6 feet.
A good warm coat.
Yeah. Don't come to my beach.
Oh God, yeah. Don't come to the what's the beach called again? San Diego's.
Or no. Newport Beach.
Newport Beach. Thank you.